Welcome to Whiteboard Wednesday. My name is Mike Cromwell.
I'm Brian DeVault.
And we're here today to talk about cybersecurity.
Yeah, and today this is what we're going to talk about, all the risk considerations that the people in the boardroom having those strategic discussions about cybersecurity should be considering.
I've sat on a couple boards. I'm an investor in a couple companies. An attack can have such severe consequences. And so if you're leading a business and you're watching this, it should be a holy shit moment.
Absolutely.
You've seen businesses that have, like, literally, they cease to exist.
Right, but it's something like 85% of them that experience a data breach are out of business in 2 years.
So for me, as we're having these conversations, what's important to me is, if you're watching this, what do you do about that?
A lot of venture capitalists these days have these very comprehensive cybersecurity assessments they do for companies before they purchase them.
Correct.
And they won't purchase them until they get in compliance with their framework. You know, the CEO, CFO, those types of roles are talking about risk, right? What risk does it represent to my business? The CISOs of the world are talking about what are we doing, strategically to better our cybersecurity posture, our position. You get down to the director level positions and they're talking about it on a tactical level, right? Where are we putting our hands? What mechanisms, what tools, what software, what platforms are we putting in place that better our defense mechanisms?
Right.
Right. And then a lot of those conversations dovetail, into other topics of conversation, which are more centered around, I think COVID was a lesson for all of us in planning around business continuity and disaster recovery. Cybersecurity is a threat in itself, right? Like, what happens if our systems go down because of a system compromise or a data breach of some type, malware attack, something that electronically affects our organization. But when you extend that conversation into the boardroom, you start to have more strategic discussions around how do I keep my business running in the event of one of these cyber incidents or events.
If you have a good plan in place and a good cybersecurity posture, like we talked about in the last 7 series of Whiteboard Wednesday, we talked about the elements of a good cyber posture.
Right.
So if that's dialed in, the director level is executing. And is it fair to say the board's providing the oversight and the governance around maintaining that posture? But if you're in an environment where you don't have that posture, I think I asked a question on the very first episode of the series, if a great cybersecurity posture on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 10,
right?
What are most businesses? And you said somewhere between a 0 and a 1.
You're right.
So if you're in that boardroom, company that's a 0 or 1, what are you talking about, and how does that conversation about risk and risk mitigation, how does that then translate downstream into the organization to a good execution plan?
So when you talk about risk management or risk mitigation, the very first thing that comes to my mind is the end user security awareness training, because that is where the majority of your risk or your exposure is associated with. It's somebody falls victim to a phishing attempt, somebody maybe in a position that has a lot of access to data within an organization, or a lot of influence within an organization. For instance, a controller, somebody that's in the finance office, that responds to a phishing attempt and that says reset your password, and they plug their password into a site that is a bad actor, and now somebody has a very powerful user in my organization's username and password that they can go log into systems and do things that have bad financial outcomes, right? Like the most common ones you hear about are a controller that emails a CFO and says, "Hey, wire this company, $1.5 million. We're in arrears on their invoice."
Which, by the way, we heard that exact story.
Yes.
From a cybersecurity expert at a bar having drinks here in McKinney. So thanks for tuning in. We're going to be over the course of the next few weeks talking about actions that you can take if you're an executive in a business, whether you're a CISO, a CEO, on the board. Tactics and actions that you can take to both assess your current level of risk, as well as actions you can take to close the gap from being at high risk to lower risk and having a good cut posture in place.
You bet. So we're going to talk about business process, business procedure, discussions you should be having internally, and then hopefully we'll be able to get into some some tactical tools and some platforms that you can use to help increase your cybersecurity posture.
And if you haven't already talked to an MSSP, reach out to Netrio. We are certainly here to help. And we can also walk you through what are things you got to look for if you're needing help today and you want to enlist an MSSP. Objective things that you ought to be looking for, tools that you can use to help assess your current level of risk.
Absolutely.
So thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for next week's Whiteboard Wednesday.
Thanks. If you liked our episode today, click here to subscribe. And for other Netrio content, check out our channel.